Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. I never considered myself someone who frightens easily. Growing up, I was always the friend who volunteered to investigate strange noises during sleepovers, the one who walked home alone through the cemetery as a shortcut, the one who laughed during horror movies while others covered their eyes. That changed 3 months ago when I moved into apartment 3B at Oakwood Heights. Now I find myself lying awake each night, dreading the moment when the clock strikes 2:47 a.m. and the footsteps begin their methodical journey down my hallway. It all started innocently enough. After receiving a promotion that required relocation to the small city of Millfield, I spent weeks searching for affordable housing. Oakwood Heights wasn't exactly what I'd envisioned, a weathered brick building from the 1930s with creaking floors and temperamental plumbing, but the rent was reasonable, and the location was just a short walk from my new office. The property manager, Mr. Winters, was a thin, nervous man who spoke quickly as he showed me around, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "The building has character," he said, gesturing vaguely at the ornate crown molding and vintage radiators. "Most of our tenants have been here for years. It's a quiet community." I signed the lease that afternoon. The apartment was on the 3rd floor at the end of a long hallway with faded floral wallpaper. My neighbors seemed sparse. I occasionally heard movement from 3A across the hall, but the apartment on the other side appeared vacant. The first few nights passed uneventfully as I unpacked and settled into my new routine. On the 4th night, I awoke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed my sleep. Glancing at my phone, I saw it was exactly 2:47 a.m. That's when I heard it for the first time, footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. They had a distinctive pattern, a heavy step followed by a lighter one, as if someone with a limp was making their way down the corridor. The sound started from the direction of the elevator, approached my door, paused briefly, then continued toward the stairwell at the opposite end of the hall. I didn't think much of it initially. Perhaps it was a neighbor returning home late or someone leaving early for a morning shift. But the next night, I woke again at precisely 2:47 a.m. to the same sound. Those unmistakable, uneven footsteps passing by my door with the same brief pause. By the 5th consecutive night of this occurrence, my curiosity had transformed into unease. On the 6th night, I decided to investigate. I positioned myself by my door, peering through the peephole as 2:47 a.m. approached. Right on schedule, I heard the elevator doors slide open, followed by those familiar uneven footsteps. I watched intently, expecting to see a neighbor with a cane or a limp. But as the footsteps grew louder approaching my door, the hallway remained completely empty. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. Yet the sound of footsteps was unmistakable, now directly outside my door, where they paused for several seconds before continuing toward the stairwell. My heart raced as I flung open the door, determined to catch whoever was playing this trick on me. The hallway was deserted. The footsteps had already moved past, heading toward the stairwell. I rushed to follow, bare feet silent against the worn carpet. But when I reached the stairwell door, it was firmly closed, showing no signs of recent disturbance. The footsteps had vanished. The next morning I approached Mr. Winters in the lobby, trying to keep my voice casual as I inquired about the nighttime foot traffic. "Does someone in the building work night shifts? I keep hearing footsteps around 2:45 in the morning." Mr. Winters froze momentarily, his hand pausing as he sorted through mail. "At 2:47, you mean?" he asked, still not meeting my eyes. The precision of his response sent a chill down my spine. "Yes, exactly at 2:47. How did you know?" He shrugged, suddenly very interested in reorganizing the mail in his hands. "Old buildings make noises. Pipes expand and contract. Wood settles. Nothing to worry about." But his reaction told me there was definitely something to worry about. That afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I purchased a small security camera and mounted it opposite my apartment door, angling it to capture the entire hallway. If someone was playing tricks on me, I'd catch them on video. That night, I lay in bed with my laptop open, watching the live feed from the camera. As 2:47 a.m. approached, I felt my muscles tense. Right on schedule, I heard the distant sound of the elevator doors opening, followed by those familiar uneven footsteps. On my screen, the hallway remained empty. The footsteps grew louder, now clearly audible both through my door and on the camera's audio feed, yet nothing appeared on screen. I watched in disbelief as the invisible footsteps approached my door, paused the sound so clear, it might have been inside my apartment, then continued toward the stairwell. The next day, I reviewed the footage repeatedly. The audio captured the footsteps perfectly, but the video showed an empty hallway. I was beginning to question my sanity when I decided to knock on my neighbor's door across the hall. Chen from 3A was a kind-faced woman in her 70s who had lived in the building for over 20 years. She invited me in for tea, and I carefully broached the subject of the nighttime disturbances. I was wondering if you've ever noticed anything strange in the hallway at night. Footsteps, maybe. Around 2:45 in the morning, Mrs. Chen's smile faded. She set down her teacup with deliberate slowness. "You're in Mr. Garner's old apartment," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I don't know who lived there before me," I admitted. She nodded slowly. "Harold Garner. Lived there for almost 30 years. He was a watchmaker, very precise man. Every night at exactly 2:47, he would take his walk. Down the hall, down the stairs, around the block, then back up. Said it helped with his insomnia." My mouth felt suddenly dry. "What happened to him?" "Fell down the stairs 5 years ago. It was raining that night, and he slipped on the top step. They found him in the morning." She paused, then added, "It happened at 2:47 a.m. The old clock in the stairwell stopped at that exact moment." I tried to keep my voice steady. "How do you know what time it was if the clock stopped?" Mrs. Chen gave me a long look. "Because I heard him fall, I heard his cane clatter down the steps, heard him cry out. By the time I got my robe on and went to check, it was too late." I thanked Mrs. Chen for the tea and returned to my apartment, my mind racing. That night I decided on a different approach. Instead of watching the camera feed, I would wait by my door and listen. But this time, I wouldn't open it. I would observe through the peephole when the footsteps paused outside. As 2:47 a.m. approached, I positioned myself silently by the door. I pressed against the peephole. The familiar sequence began: elevator doors, uneven footsteps approaching. I held my breath as they neared my door and then stopped. For several seconds there was complete silence. Then, slowly, something began to block the light coming through the peephole from the hallway. Something was leaning in, looking back at me. I jerked away from the door, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. After a moment of paralyzing fear, I forced myself to look again. The peephole was clear, and I could hear the footsteps continuing down the hall toward the stairwell. The next day, I went to the local library and searched through newspaper archives. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for: a small article from 5 years ago reporting the death of Harold Garner, 78, who had fallen down the stairs in his apartment building. The article mentioned he was a retired watchmaker known for his precision craftsmanship and punctuality. A quote from a neighbor described him as a creature of habit who took a walk at the same time every night to manage his chronic insomnia. I spent the rest of the day researching the building's history, finding nothing remarkable beyond its age and the typical urban legends that surround old structures. As evening approached, I felt a growing dread. I couldn't face another night of those footsteps, another moment of seeing something looking back through my peephole. I decided to stay at a hotel. I packed an overnight bag, called a cab, and left Oakwood Heights at 8:00 p.m., determined to get a full night's sleep away from the haunting rhythm of those uneven footsteps. The hotel was modern and anonymous, its hallways brightly lit and silent. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from nights of disrupted sleep. I awoke suddenly, my heart racing. The hotel room was dark, but something had disturbed me. I reached for my phone 2:47 a.m., and then I heard that familiar pattern of footsteps, a heavy step followed by a lighter one. Coming down the hotel hallway, approaching my room, I lay frozen in bed as the footsteps stopped outside my door. The silence stretched for several agonizing seconds. Then came the sound I had been dreading, the slow turning of the door handle. I watched in horror as the handle rotated downward, though I knew I had engaged both the lock and the security chain. The door opened a few inches, stopped by the chain, and through the narrow gap I saw nothing but darkness. Then a voice, raspy, aged but clearly audible, spoke from the emptiness. "Time to go for our walk." I screamed and lunged for the light switch. The room flooded with light, and the door was closed, the security chain intact. I spent the remainder of the night, huddled in a chair, lights blazing, waiting for dawn. I returned to my apartment the next day, not because I wanted to, but because I now understood that whatever was happening would follow me wherever I went. That afternoon, I knocked on Mrs. Chen's door again. "The footsteps," I said when she answered. "They followed me to my hotel last night." She didn't seem surprised. Harold was very particular about his routine. Very particular about who lived in his space, too. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "The tenants before you, there have been 3 since Harold died. None of them stayed longer than a month. They all complained about the footsteps. Why didn't Mr. Winters tell me this?" I demanded. "He's had trouble keeping that unit rented. Can you blame him for not mentioning it?" That night I decided on a new approach. If Harold Garner was a creature of habit, perhaps he simply wanted his routine respected. At 2:40 a.m., I dressed in my coat and shoes. I stood by my door, waiting. At exactly 2:47 a.m., when I heard the elevator doors open and the footsteps begin, I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was empty, but the footsteps had stopped. I cleared my throat nervously. "Mr. Garner," I said to the empty hallway, "I understand this is your walking time. I thought perhaps I could join you." For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then the footsteps resumed, slower now, as if waiting for me. I began walking down the hallway, matching my pace to the invisible presence beside me. Together we approached the stairwell, descended the 3 flights of stairs, and exited the building into the cool night air. The footsteps led me around the block, following what I assumed was Harold's nightly route. The streets were deserted, streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. As we walked, I felt a strange sense of companionship with my invisible guide. When we returned to Oakwood Heights and climbed the stairs back to the 3rd floor, the footsteps paused outside my door. "Good night, Mr. Garner," I said softly. "Same time tomorrow." The footsteps retreated down the hall toward the stairwell, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without disturbance. This became our routine. Each night at 2:47 a.m., I would join the invisible Harold Garner for his nightly constitutional. Sometimes I would talk as we walked, telling him about my day or commenting on changes in the neighborhood. The footsteps never responded, but I sensed a contentment in their steady rhythm. 2 weeks into this arrangement, I decided to learn more about my spectral companion. I visited the local watchmaker's shop, where the elderly owner remembered Harold Garner well. "Brilliant craftsman," he told me. "Could hear if a watch was running even a second slow, but he was a lonely man. His wife died young, and he never remarried. Lived for his work and his routines." That night as we walked, I asked more questions about Harold's life, not expecting answers but feeling he might appreciate being remembered. When we returned to my door, I said my usual goodnight, but this time I added, "Thank you for sharing your home with me." The footsteps paused longer than usual. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like a tap, as if a cane had gently struck the floor in acknowledgement, before the footsteps continued down the hall. The next morning I found a small package outside my door. Inside was an antique pocket watch, beautifully crafted, with an inscription on the inside cover. "Time shared is never wasted." H. Jim, I still live in apartment 3B at Oakwood Heights. Every night at 2:47 a.m., I take a walk with Harold Garner. The other tenants think I'm eccentric, walking the same route at the same time each night, regardless of weather. Mr. Winters avoids eye contact more than ever. Only Mrs. Chen understands, nodding to me knowingly when we pass in the hallway. Sometimes, new residents complain about footsteps in the night. When they do, I invite them for tea and explain about Harold Garner, the watchmaker who lived in 3B, who still takes his nightly walk at exactly 2:47 a.m. I tell them there's nothing to fear. He's just a creature of habit, keeping time as he always has. Most of them move out anyway. I don't mind. It keeps the building quiet, just the way Harold likes it. As for me, I've come to find comfort in those uneven footsteps. In a world of chaos and unpredictability, there's something reassuring about a routine you can set your watch by, even if that routine belongs to someone who died 5 years ago. I check my pocket watch. The one Harold gave me. It's 2:46 a.m. Time for our walk. Story 2. I never used to be afraid of mirrors. They were simply functional objects, reflecting reality without bias or agenda. That changed after my accident. What began as subtle discrepancies evolved into something I still struggle to comprehend. Even now, as I write this account, I keep glancing nervously at the covered mirror in the corner of my room, wondering what might be watching me from behind that thin fabric barrier. It started 3 months ago. I was driving home from a late meeting, rain hammering against my windshield with such ferocity that visibility was reduced to mere feet. The headlights of an oncoming truck suddenly veered into my lane. I swerved instinctively, my car hydroplaning across the slick asphalt before crashing into a guardrail. The impact wasn't particularly violent. The airbag didn't even deploy, but my head struck the side window with enough force to leave me dazed. The hospital kept me overnight for observation. Mild concussion, they said. Nothing showed up on the CT scan. No reason for concern. I was discharged the following morning with instructions to rest and monitor for unusual symptoms. The doctor mentioned potential headaches, dizziness, and sensitivity to light, all normal post-concussion issues. What she didn't mention was that I might begin to lose synchronization with my own reflection. The first incident occurred about a week after the accident. I was brushing my teeth, staring absently into the bathroom mirror as most people do during their morning routine. My mind was elsewhere, contemplating the workday ahead, when something caught my attention. Something wrong. It took me several seconds to identify what had disturbed me. When I blinked, my reflection seemed to close its eyes a fraction of a second too late. I froze, toothbrush suspended mid-stroke, and deliberately blinked again. This time, everything appeared normal. My reflection matched my movements perfectly. I dismissed the earlier discrepancy as a trick of my still healing brain, a momentary visual processing glitch. After all, the doctor had warned me that concussions could cause perceptual anomalies. 3 days later, it happened again. I was adjusting my tie in the hallway mirror before leaving for work. As I turned to grab my jacket from the coat rack, I caught a glimpse of my reflection remaining faced forward for just a moment before turning with me. It was so quick that I immediately questioned whether I'd seen it at all. I spent several minutes performing tests, moving my arms, turning my head, watching carefully to confirm that my reflection behaved as it should. Everything seemed normal, which only heightened my unease. The incidents increased in frequency and duration over the following weeks. I would wave my hand and notice my reflection's motion lagging by a half second. I would smile, and my mirrored counterpart would maintain a neutral expression momentarily before matching me. I began avoiding mirrors when possible, but modern life is filled with reflective surfaces, windows, computer screens, polished metal, making complete avoidance impossible. My growing paranoia led me back to the hospital for a follow-up examination. The neurologist found nothing physically wrong, but suggested that I might be experiencing a rare form of visual processing disorder related to my concussion. She referred me to a specialist and prescribed medication to help with what she assumed was anxiety. Neither the pills nor the specialist provided any relief or explanation. The turning point came approximately 6 weeks after the accident. I woke in the middle of the night, my bladder insistently full. Half asleep, I stumbled to the bathroom, not bothering to turn on the hallway light. The bathroom itself was dimly illuminated by a small nightlight plugged into the wall socket, just enough illumination to navigate without fully waking myself. As I washed my hands afterward, I glanced reflexively at the mirror above the sink. What I saw jolted me into complete alertness. My reflection was smiling, not a subtle curve of the lips, but a wide, toothy grin that stretched unnaturally across its face. I was certain my own expression was one of shock and horror, not amusement. For several heart-stopping seconds, we stared at each other, me with mounting terror, my reflection with that impossible smile. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one finger to its lips in the universal gesture for silence. I fled the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I spent the remainder of the night huddled in my bed, lights blazing, too terrified to sleep. When morning finally arrived, I convinced myself that I had experienced a particularly vivid nightmare, a manifestation of stress and lingering concussion symptoms. This comforting rationalization lasted until I entered the bathroom again. The mirror appeared normal, reflecting my pale, exhausted face accurately. But as I leaned closer to examine the dark circles under my eyes, I noticed something on the mirror's surface, a smudge that looked distinctly like a fingerprint, precisely where my reflection had pressed its finger. The night before, I began researching mirror phenomena, obsessively, diving into scientific explanations and folklore alike. I read about rare neurological conditions that affect visual processing and self-recognition. I explored psychological disorders involving depersonalization and derealization. I even ventured into more esoteric territory, legends about mirrors capturing souls, serving as portals to other dimensions, or housing malevolent entities. Nothing provided satisfactory answers, but one recurring theme in various cultural superstitions caught my attention: the danger of mirrors during vulnerable states. Many traditions warned against sleeping near mirrors, or gazing into them during transitional times like midnight or twilight. My accident, I realized, had created its own kind of vulnerability, a crack in my perception that something was exploiting. I covered all the mirrors in my apartment with sheets, removing smaller ones to a storage closet. This brought temporary relief but also practical complications. Shaving became a hazardous guessing game. Checking my appearance before leaving home became impossible. Colleagues began commenting on my increasingly disheveled look, and a few close friends expressed concern about my mental health. My respite lasted approximately 2 weeks before curiosity and doubt began to erode my resolve. Was I truly experiencing something supernatural, or had I simply succumbed to paranoia fueled by post-concussion syndrome? There was only one way to find out. I set up a video camera in my bathroom, positioning it to capture both me and my reflection in the mirror. I removed the sheet covering the mirror and proceeded with a normal morning routine: brushing teeth, shaving carefully with electric razor, combing my hair. Throughout the process, I studiously avoided looking directly at my reflection, instead focusing on the camera's viewfinder where I could see both myself and the mirror at a safe remove. Nothing unusual happened during the recording. My movements and those of my reflection appeared perfectly synchronized. Disappointed yet relieved, I transferred the video to my laptop for closer examination. Perhaps the camera would capture subtleties my eyes had missed. The footage initially confirmed what I'd observed during the recording: normal synchronized movements. But as I reviewed it frame by frame, I noticed discrepancies. In several instances, my reflection's eyes shifted direction a few frames before mine did. When I sneezed unexpectedly, my reflection's hands moved to cover its face slightly ahead of my own. These differences were imperceptible at normal playback speed, but undeniable when examined closely. The most disturbing anomaly occurred at the very end of the recording. As I turned to leave the bathroom, my reflection remained facing forward for nearly 3 full seconds before turning as well. In those 3 seconds, its expression changed subtly, the corners of its mouth lifting in the beginning of that same unnatural smile I'd seen that night. I was not hallucinating. Something was wrong with my reflection, or more accurately, the entity that had replaced it. That night, I received a call from my friend Michael, who had been checking in on me regularly since noticing my deteriorating appearance. He insisted on coming over, concerned by the increasingly erratic nature of our recent conversations. I agreed, desperate for human contact and hoping his presence might provide some grounding. Michael arrived with takeout food and a determined cheerfulness that momentarily lifted my spirits. We ate in the living room, carefully positioned away from the covered mirror hanging on the wall. I hadn't told him about my mirror situation, fearing he would assume I'd completely lost my mind. "Your place looks different," he commented, glancing around. "Redecorating." "Something like that," I replied evasively. His eyes lingered on the sheet-covered mirror. "What's with the ghost furniture look?" I hesitated, then decided a partial truth might satisfy his curiosity. The light was reflecting badly off the glass. It was giving me headaches. Michael nodded, though his expression suggested skepticism, still having problems from the accident. "It's been what? 2 months now." "Almost 3, I corrected. "And yes, some lingering issues. The doctors say it's normal." The conversation shifted to safer topics: work, mutual friends, a movie he'd recently seen. For a while I almost forgot about my reflection problem. Then Michael needed to use the bathroom. I felt a surge of panic as he stood up. "Wait," I blurted out. "The bathroom mirror, I covered it for a reason." Michael paused, giving me a concerned look. "Okay, promise you won't remove the covering," I insisted. "It's important." "Sure, man. Whatever you say." He disappeared into the bathroom, leaving me anxiously waiting in the living room. Several minutes passed before I heard his voice call out, "Hey, can you come here for a second?" My heart sank. I knew immediately what had happened. Despite his promise, curiosity had gotten the better of him. I walked slowly to the bathroom, finding Michael standing before the now uncovered mirror. "I'm sorry," he said, not sounding particularly apologetic, "but this is getting weird, and I'm worried about you. What's going on with the mirrors?" I stood in the doorway, carefully avoiding looking at the mirror itself. "Cover it back up, please." "Not until you explain what's happening," he insisted. "This isn't healthy behavior. You wouldn't believe me if I told you."
Try me.
I took a deep breath. My reflection isn't matching my movements anymore. It's like it has its own agenda. Michael's expression shifted from concern to outright worry. "That's not possible. I know how it sounds," I admitted, "but I have proof." I retrieved my laptop and showed him the video I'd recorded, pointing out the discrepancies in timing and movement. He watched silently, his brow furrowed. When the video ended, he looked up at me. "I don't see anything unusual. Your reflection is doing exactly what you're doing." "That's not possible," I protested, rewinding to the most obvious discrepancy, the 3-second delay at the end. "Look right here." I turn away, but my reflection stays facing forward. Michael shook his head. "No, it turns when you turn. I don't see any delay." A chill ran through me. I played the section again and again. Michael insisted the movements were perfectly synchronized. Either he was lying to placate someone he believed was mentally unstable, or the video itself had somehow changed since I last viewed it. "Look at me," Michael said gently. "I think you might be experiencing some psychological effects from your accident. It happens, the brain is complicated, and trauma can manifest in unexpected ways." I wanted to argue further but realized it was pointless. He couldn't or wouldn't see what I had seen. Instead, I nodded wearily. "Maybe you're right. I'll talk to my doctor about it." Michael seemed relieved by my apparent acquiescence. He stayed another hour, clearly reluctant to leave me alone, but eventually departing with a promise to check in the following day. As soon as he left, I recovered the bathroom mirror and checked the video again. The discrepancies were gone. The footage now showed perfect synchronization between my movements and my reflections. I felt a wave of doubt crash over me. Was Michael right? Was this all in my mind? That night I took one of the anxiety pills the neurologist had prescribed and fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of endless corridors lined with mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different version of myself. In the dream, I was searching for the eerie me. Increasingly panicked as I realized I couldn't remember which one it was, I awoke to the sound of water running. Groggy from the medication, it took me several moments to register that the bathroom faucet was on. I had not turned it on. I lived alone. Fear paralyzed me momentarily before survival instincts kicked in. I reached for my phone, ready to call emergency services. When the water abruptly shut off, silence descended, heavy and expectant. I should have fled the apartment immediately. Instead, drawn by a compulsion I still can't explain, I approached the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. I pushed it open slowly. The bathroom was empty, the faucet no longer running. The sheet covering the mirror had fallen or been removed, revealing the reflective surface beneath. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look up. A drop of water splashed against the sink, unnaturally loud in the silence. Another followed. I raised my eyes just enough to see the faucet. It was completely dry. The drops were falling from somewhere else, against every instinct screaming for retreat. I lifted my gaze to the mirror. My reflection stood there, but its appearance had changed subtly. Its skin was paler, its eyes slightly sunken. Water dripped from its fingertips onto the sink that existed only in the mirror world, not in my bathroom. The reflection's lips curved into that, now familiar smile. "Who are you?" I whispered. My reflection's smile widened. When it spoke, its lips moved independently of mine, its voice a distorted version of my own. "I'm you," it said. "The you that could have been." "What does that mean?" "You should have died in that accident." The reflection continued, its tone conversational despite the horrifying content. "The truck hit your car directly. Your skull shattered against the window." I shook my head in denial. "That's not what happened." I swerved. "The truck missed me." "In this reality," it agreed. "But there are others. I'm from one where the outcome was different." A chill ran through me as impossible implications unfolded. "You're saying you're me from another dimension? One where I died?" The reflection nodded, seeming pleased by my understanding. "The impact created a fracture, not just in your skull but in the barrier between realities. I've been trying to cross over since then. But these things take time. Synchronization is difficult." "What do you want?" My voice trembled despite my efforts to remain calm. "A second chance." Its expression became almost wistful. "Death is cold and empty. I want to live again. In my body," I realized with growing horror. It was mine first, it countered. Or rather, it was identical to mine. A perfect match. I backed away from the mirror. "This isn't possible. You're a hallucination, a symptom of brain trauma." The reflection laughed, a hollow sound that echoed strangely. "Test your theory. Cover the mirror again. Take more medication. See a dozen specialists. I'll still be here, getting stronger, more synchronized. Eventually the barrier will be thin enough for me to step through completely." I grabbed the fallen sheet and flung it over the mirror, cutting off the reflection mid-sentence. My heart pounded as I retreated to my bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night researching near-death experiences, parallel dimensions, and quantum theories about multiple realities. Most of what I found was speculative or pseudoscientific, but certain concepts resonated disturbingly with my situation, particularly the idea that consciousness might exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. By morning, I had formulated a desperate plan. If my reflection was correct about the accident creating a fracture between realities, perhaps distance from the location would weaken its ability to cross over. I packed essential belongings, called my employer to request emergency personal leave, and prepared to drive as far from the city as possible. As I was loading my car, Michael called. I let it go to voicemail, unwilling to spend time explaining my sudden departure. He left a concerned message, mentioning that he'd spoken with my sister about my deteriorating mental state, and they were considering intervention options. I was pulling out of my parking space when Michael's car turned into the lot. He spotted me immediately and blocked my exit, getting out and approaching with determined strides. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Your sister and I have been worried sick. I need to get away for a while," I replied, keeping my explanation deliberately vague. "Clear my head." Michael's expression softened slightly. "That might actually be a good idea, but not alone. Not in your current state. Let me come with you. Or better yet, let's get you some professional help first." "I don't have time for that," I insisted, anxiety mounting with each passing minute spent stationary. "I need to leave now." "Why? What's the rush?" I hesitated, knowing how it would sound but desperate enough to try the truth. "My reflection is trying to take over my body. It's getting stronger, and I need to get away from here to weaken its connection." Michael's face fell, confirming my fears about how such a statement would be received. "Okay, I didn't want to do this, but you're leaving me no choice." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling for a psychiatric evaluation. You need help that I can't provide." Panic surged through me. Being committed to a psychiatric facility would trap me in one location, surrounded by mirrors I couldn't cover or avoid. It would be handing victory to the thing in the mirror. "Fine," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "You're right, I'm not thinking clearly. Let me park properly and we can talk about this rationally." Relief washed over Michael's face as he lowered the phone. "Thank you, I promise we'll figure this out together." I nodded, putting the car in reverse as if to reposition it in a parking space. Instead, the moment Michael stepped aside, I accelerated backward, then shifted into drive and sped past him before he could react. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in shocked disbelief, phone raised to his ear once more. I drove for 14 hours straight that first day, stopping only for gas and avoiding public restrooms with their inevitable mirrors. I slept in my car at a remote rest stop, using my jacket to cover the rearview mirror. The following day brought another 12 hours of driving, taking me deep into rural areas where I finally found a small motel desperate enough for business not to question my request for a room with all mirrors removed. For 3 days I believed my plan was working. I encountered no anomalies, no signs of my reflection acting independently. On the 4th morning, I risked using the chrome coffee pot in my room to check my appearance, tilting it to catch my reflection in its curved surface. Everything appeared normal, movements synchronized, expressions matching my own. Perhaps distance had indeed weakened the connection, or perhaps the entity had never been real at all. Just a manifestation of post-concussion syndrome, combined with stress and sleep deprivation. The latter explanation became increasingly appealing as days passed without incident. After a week of nomadic existence, I began considering a return to normalcy. Not to my apartment that felt too dangerous still, but perhaps to a new city, a fresh start. I could request a transfer at work, find a new place without mirrors or remove them before moving in. It seemed possible to manage the situation, even if the phenomenon was real. This tentative optimism lasted until I checked my email at a local library. Among the accumulated messages was one from Michael with an attachment, a video file. The subject line reads simply, "Watch this, please." I hesitated before downloading the file, suspecting it might be another attempt to convince me of my supposed mental instability. Curiosity eventually won out. The video began playing, showing Michael sitting in what appeared to be his living room. "I owe you an apology," he began, his expression solemn. "I didn't believe you about the mirror thing. I thought you were having some kind of breakdown." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen many times before. "After you left, I went back to your apartment. I was worried about you, and honestly, I was gathering evidence to help get you committed for your own safety." He shifted uncomfortably before continuing. "I recorded some video of your bathroom, thinking maybe there was something environmental there, triggering your delusions, mold, gas leak, whatever. I didn't see anything unusual while I was there, but when I reviewed the footage later," he trailed off, visibly disturbed. The video cut to shaky footage of my bathroom, focusing on the mirror I had covered. Michael's voice continued as narration. I'm going to remove the sheet to check behind it. There might be something on the wall causing problems. His hand appeared in frame, pulling down the sheet. The mirror reflected my empty bathroom normally at first. Then slowly a figure moved into view in the reflection, a figure that resembled me. Though with subtle differences, it stood staring out from the mirror despite there being no one actually present in the bathroom. The camera jerked violently as Michael presumably reacted to seeing something impossible. When the frame stabilized again, the mirror showed only the empty bathroom once more. The video cut back to Michael. I don't know what that was, but I saw it. It looked like you, but wrong somehow. I went back the next day with a different camera, thinking maybe there was some technical glitch, but I couldn't replicate it. He leaned closer to his camera. Whatever you're running from, it might be real. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. Call me when you get this, we'll figure it out together. The video ended, leaving me staring at the black screen, my heart pounding. Validation should have brought relief, but instead it brought fresh terror. If Michael had seen my doppelganger in the mirror, then the entity was real, and apparently capable of manifesting even in my absence. More disturbing was the implication that it wasn't bound to mirrors that had reflected me personally. It could potentially appear in any reflective surface anywhere. Distance hadn't weakened its connection at all. I left the library immediately, paranoia surging as I passed windows and polished surfaces. In my car, I covered every reflective surface with clothing or paper before driving to a different town, checking into another motel under a false name. That night I called Michael from a burner phone I'd purchased. He answered on the first ring. It's me, I said without preamble. Thank God. He breathed. Are you okay? Where are you? Better if you don't know, I replied. I got your video. You believe me now? Yes, he said firmly. I can't explain what I saw, but it was definitely something. Have you had any more incidents? Not since I left. But your video suggests it's not just about my proximity to the mirrors I regularly used. It can manifest elsewhere. Michael was silent for a moment. What do we do now? Should we try to research this somehow? Maybe find an expert? What kind of expert handles interdimensional reflections? I asked bitterly. This isn't exactly a recognized phenomenon. There are people who study the paranormal scientifically, he suggested. Or maybe quantum physicists. This could be some kind of quantum entanglement thing. The conversation continued in this vein, exploring increasingly unlikely solutions. Eventually we agreed that Michael would begin researching while I remained mobile and mirror-free. We scheduled another call for the following week. That call never happened. 3 days later, I received a text from Michael's number. Come home. I found a solution. Something about the message felt wrong. Michael would have provided details, expressed excitement, or at least relief at finding an answer. This terse command seemed out of character. I replied cautiously, "What kind of solution?" The response came quickly, hard to explain by text. "Need to show you in person. It's about synchronization." My blood ran cold. Synchronization. The exact term my reflection had used when describing its efforts to cross over. This wasn't Michael texting me. I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I then called Michael's work, claiming to be a cousin trying to reach him about a family emergency. His assistant informed me that Michael had called in sick for the past 2 days. Dread settled over me like a physical weight. I needed to know if Michael was safe. But returning to the city meant putting myself within reach of the entity that had likely already taken action against my friend. After agonizing deliberation, I decided to return, not directly to Michael's place or my apartment, but to observe from a distance first. I drove through the night, arriving at dawn and parking near Michael's building with a clear view of the entrance. Hours passed with no sign of him. Around noon, I worked up the courage to approach his building, using the spare key he'd given me years ago to enter his apartment if he wasn't home. The apartment was immaculate, unusually so for Michael, who tended toward organized chaos. Everything was perfectly arranged, surfaces gleaming. All the mirrors were uncovered. "Michael," I called out, moving cautiously through the silent rooms. The bathroom door was closed. As I approached, I noticed water seeping out beneath it, spreading across the hardwood floor in a widening puddle. I should have run. I should have called the police. Instead, I opened the door. Michael lay in the overflowing bathtub, his vacant eyes staring at the ceiling. The water had a pinkish tinge. On the mirror above the sink, written in what appeared to be blood, were the words, "Come find me." I stumbled backward in horror, fumbling for my phone to call emergency services. As I turned to flee the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. My reflection stood watching me, that now familiar smile spreading across its face. Unlike previous encounters, it made no attempt to mimic my movements or expressions. It simply watched, triumphant. I fled the apartment, reported finding Michael's body from an anonymous payphone, and drove until my car ran out of gas. I abandoned the vehicle and continued on foot, eventually finding myself in this small coastal town where I've been hiding for the past 2 weeks. I avoid all reflective surfaces now. I cover the windows at night so they won't become mirrors against the darkness. I write this account by candlelight, hoping that sharing my experience might somehow help others who encounter similar phenomena, or at least provide some explanation, if I disappear, because I know it's still hunting me. Sometimes in the corner of my eye I catch glimpses of my own face watching me from reflections in puddles or store windows. The smile is always there, patient and knowing. I don't know how much longer I can run. Each day, I feel a strange pulling sensation, as if something is trying to turn me inside out. My thoughts sometimes feel doubled, overlapping with foreign ones. I wake up in positions I don't remember assuming, with a taste like copper in my mouth. If you're reading this and you see someone who looks like me, but something seems off about their smile or run, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't look too long into mirrors, especially after suffering head trauma. The barriers between worlds are thinner than we think, and there are things waiting on the other side, wearing our faces, smiling our smiles, just waiting for a chance to step through. Story 3. I never wanted to move into this house. From the moment I first stepped through the front door during our initial viewing, something felt off. But Sarah was enchanted by the Victorian architecture, the spacious rooms, and most importantly the price, which was suspiciously below market value for this neighborhood. "It's a steal," she kept saying, her eyes gleaming with excitement as she wandered from room to room, already mentally placing our furniture and planning renovations. The real estate agent, a thin woman with a perpetual nervous smile, seemed eager to close the deal. When I asked about the history of the house, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Built in 1897 by the Aldrich family," she said quickly. "Wonderful craftsmanship, they don't make houses like this anymore." And then she smoothly redirected Sarah's attention to the original crown molding in the dining room. I should have pressed harder. I should have asked why the previous owners had left after just 8 months. I should have questioned why none of the neighbors made eye contact when we were outside, examining the property. But Sarah's happiness clouded my judgment, and 3 weeks later, we signed the papers and became the proud owners of 47 Willow Creek Road. The first few days were consumed by moving and unpacking. The exhaustion of hauling furniture and arranging our belongings temporarily masked any misgivings I had about the house. It wasn't until our 4th night there that I heard it for the first time. I had gone down to the basement to find some tools. Our basement wasn't the typical damp, cobweb-filled dungeon you might imagine in an old house. The previous owners had partially finished it, with painted concrete floors and drywall covering most of the original stone foundation. Still, it had that distinct basement smell, a mixture of earth, old wood, and something else I couldn't quite identify. As I rummaged through a box of hardware near the eastern wall, I froze. There was a sound, faint but unmistakable, a slow rhythmic whisper that rose and fell in a steady pattern. In out, in out. It sounded like breathing. I straightened up, my heart suddenly pounding. "Hello?" I called out, feeling immediately foolish. Of course, no one was there. It was probably just the heating system, or pipes settling in the old house. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation that the sound was alive somehow. I approached the eastern wall cautiously. The breathing, if that's what it was, seemed to be coming from directly behind the drywall. I pressed my ear against the cool surface, and the sound intensified. Definitely breathing, slow and measured, like someone in a deep sleep. A rational explanation. There had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps an animal had somehow gotten trapped in there, a raccoon or a possum, though the breathing sounded too substantial for such a small creature. I tapped lightly on the wall, expecting to startle whatever might be there. The breathing stopped. For several long seconds, there was complete silence. Then, just as I began to convince myself I had imagined it, the breathing resumed, but different now. Faster. Aware. I practically ran up the basement stairs, slamming the door behind me. Sarah looked up from her laptop at the kitchen table, eyebrows raised in question. "Just a mouse or something," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "We should probably get some traps." That night, I lay awake beside Sarah's sleeping form, unable to banish the memory of that breathing from my mind. It wasn't just the sound itself that disturbed me. It was the way it had changed after I knocked on the wall. As if whatever was behind there had been alerted to my presence, as if it had been listening. I told myself I would investigate properly in the morning, with daylight and a better flashlight, maybe even cut into the drywall if necessary. But when morning came, the rational light of day made my fears seem absurd. Houses make noises, old houses especially. It was nothing to worry about, but I couldn't stay away from the basement. Over the next few days, I found myself inventing reasons to go down there. Each time I would stand silently by the eastern wall, listening. Sometimes I heard nothing, but more often than not, the breathing was there, soft and steady, emanating from somewhere behind the wall. I didn't tell Sarah. She was stressed enough with her new job, and I didn't want to worry her with what was likely just my overactive imagination. Instead, I began researching the history of our house in my spare time. The local historical society had limited information. The house had indeed been built by the Aldrich family in the late 19th century. Thomas Aldrich had been a successful merchant who built the house for his wife and 3 children. They lived there until 1924, when the house was sold following Thomas's death. After that, ownership changed hands numerous times over the decades. What the real estate agent hadn't mentioned, and what I discovered through old newspaper archives, was that the land our house stood on had once been part of a small family cemetery in the early 80s. Most of the graves had been relocated when the town expanded, but there were rumors that not all remains had been properly accounted for. This discovery sent a chill down my spine, but I reminded myself that many old houses in New England were built on or near former burial grounds. It didn't necessarily mean anything sinister. Then I found something else, a small article from 1978 about renovations to our house. The then owners had discovered a sealed room in the basement while doing work on the foundation. The article didn't provide details about what they found in the room, only that the renovation project was subsequently abandoned. That night I dreamt of the basement wall. In my dream I could see through it, as if the drywall had become transparent. Behind it was a small earthen chamber, and in that chamber lay a figure, curled on its side, its chest rising and falling with each breath. I couldn't see its face, but somehow I knew it was watching me through the wall, waiting. I woke up drenched in sweat, the memory of the dream vivid in my mind. Sarah stirred beside me. "You okay?" she mumbled sleepily. "Fine," I whispered. "Just a bad dream." But it wasn't fine, because now I knew I had to look behind that wall. The next day, I waited until Sarah left for work. Then I gathered my tools, a hammer, a utility knife, and a powerful flashlight, and descended into the basement. My heart was pounding as I approached the eastern wall, half expecting to hear the breathing grow louder with each step I took. But the basement was silent. I chose a spot on the wall where the breathing had seemed strongest and carefully cut a small square in the drywall with the utility knife. Peeling back the section, I shone my flashlight into the gap. There was a space behind the wall, a narrow gap between the drywall and what appeared to be the original stone foundation of the house. But what caught my attention was the condition of the stone. It was discolored in places, with strange dark stains seeping through, and it felt wrong. The surface seemed to have an almost organic quality to it, the stones fitting together in patterns that didn't quite make sense architecturally. As I examined the wall more closely, I noticed something else, a faint warmth emanating from the stones. Basements are typically cool, especially stone foundations in old houses. But these stones felt warm to the touch, almost like skin with blood flowing beneath it. I jerked my hand back, suddenly nauseated. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I was about to replace the cut section of drywall when I heard it, the breathing. But now it wasn't coming from behind the wall. It was coming from everywhere, filling the basement with its slow, rhythmic sound. In, out, I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The breathing grew louder, more insistent, and underneath it, I could now hear something else, a faint scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way through the stone. I didn't bother to clean up my tools. I just ran, taking the basement stairs 2 at a time, not stopping, until I was outside in the bright sunshine, gulping down fresh air. That afternoon, I called in sick to work, and drove to the town hall to search for more information about our house. The clerk in the records department was an elderly man with thick glasses and a suspicious nature. "Research, you say?" he asked, when I explained what I was looking for. "Any particular reason you're interested in that property?" "Just curious about its history," I replied, trying to sound casual. "We just moved in, and want to learn more about the place." He gave me a long look before shuffling off to retrieve the records. When he returned, he placed a thin folder on the counter between us. "Not much here," he said. "Most of the original documents were lost in the town hall fire of '62. I thanked him, and began paging through the sparse contents: property tax records, permits for various renovations over the years, a survey map from 1950, nothing particularly illuminating, until I came to a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1897, the year the house was built. The article described a dispute between Thomas Aldridge and the town council regarding the construction of his new home. Apparently, Aldridge had insisted on building at that specific location, despite concerns that it was unsuitable. The article mentioned prior religious activities at the site but didn't elaborate. "Do you know anything about religious activities at this location before the house was built?" I asked the clerk. He hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "There are stories," he said finally. "Nothing official in the records, mind you, but old-timers used to talk about a group that met there in the early 19th century. Some kind of, well, some would call it a cult." "A cult," I repeated, my mouth suddenly dry. He nodded reluctantly. "Supposedly they practiced some form of resurrection ritual, believed they could bring back the dead through certain procedures." He shrugged. "But that's just local folklore. Nothing documented." I left the town hall with more questions than answers, a growing unease settling in the pit of my stomach. When I got home, Sarah's car was in the driveway. I found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "You're home early," she said, giving me a quick kiss. "Feeling better?" "Not really," I admitted. "Sarah, have you noticed anything strange about the house?" She paused, knife hovering over a half-chopped onion. "Strange how?" I hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. "Just noises, especially in the basement." "It's an old house, Michael," she said, reasonably. "It's gonna make noises." "I know," but I stopped, noticing for the first time the dark circles under her eyes. "Are you sleeping okay?" She resumed chopping, a bit more forcefully than necessary. "I've been having weird dreams, that's all. Probably just stress from the new job." "What kind of dreams?" She was quiet for a moment. "I dream that I'm in the basement," she said finally, her voice soft. "There's someone calling me from behind the wall. They need help. They can't breathe." A cold dread washed over me. "Have you been in the basement recently?" "No," she said, then frowned. "Well, Maybe. I don't remember. I've been sleepwalking again. Sarah had experienced episodes of sleepwalking during particularly stressful periods in the past, but it had been years since the last incident. Michael, she said suddenly, putting down the knife. Do you think there's something wrong with this house? I wanted to reassure her, to dismiss both our experiences as products of stress and an unfamiliar environment, but the memory of that breathing, and now her dreams, made it impossible to lie. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm going to find out. That night, I set up a small camera in the basement, positioned to record the eastern wall. If something was happening down there, I wanted evidence. I also decided to sleep on the couch in the living room, positioned where I could see the basement door. If Sarah started sleepwalking again, I would know. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the distinct sound of the basement door opening. In the dim light filtering through the windows, I could make out Sarah's silhouette moving quietly toward the basement stairs. Sarah, I called softly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't respond or give any indication that she'd heard me. She simply opened the door and began descending the stairs with a fluid grace that seemed unnatural in the darkness. I followed her, keeping a safe distance. I knew you weren't supposed to wake sleepwalkers abruptly, but I also couldn't let her wander alone in the basement in this state. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found Sarah standing motionless in front of the eastern wall, the exact spot where I'd heard the breathing. Her right hand was pressed flat against the wall, her head tilted as if listening intently. Sarah, I whispered again, moving closer. She turned toward me, her eyes open but vacant. They're waiting, she said, her voice eerily calm and not quite her own. They've been waiting for so long. Who's waiting? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. The ones beneath, she replied. They need to come through. A chill ran down my spine. Come through from where? Sarah smiled, a strange expression that didn't belong on her face. From the other side. The wall is getting thinner. Can't you feel it? As if in response to her words, the breathing started louder than I'd ever heard it before. It seemed to come from directly behind the wall where Sarah's hand rested. But now it wasn't just one breath I could hear. It was many, all slightly out of sync with each other, creating a disturbing chorus of inhales and exhales. The wall beneath Sarah's hand began to bulge outward, the drywall flexing as if something was pushing against it from the other side. Small cracks appeared around her splayed fingers, radiating outward like a spider web. Sarah, come away from there, I said urgently, reaching for her arm. As my fingers closed around her wrist, her head snapped toward me with unnatural speed. They want to meet you, Michael, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. They've been watching you. They like you. I pulled her away from the wall with more force than I intended. As her hand broke contact with the surface, there was a sound like a vacuum seal breaking, and the bulge in the wall receded. The breathing stopped abruptly. Sarah collapsed against me, suddenly heavy as the unnatural stiffness left her body. Her eyes fluttered, and she looked around in confusion. Michael, what are we doing in the basement? You were sleepwalking, I said, guiding her toward the stairs, eager to get us both out of there. Let's go back to bed. As we climbed the stairs, I glanced back at the eastern wall. In the dim light, I could see that the small section I'd cut open earlier had been enlarged, the edges torn and ragged as if someone had clawed at it from our side, or something had pushed through from the other side. The next morning, Sarah had no memory of her sleepwalking episode. I didn't press her, not wanting to add to her stress. Instead, I waited until she left for work, then checked the camera I'd set up in the basement. The footage was disturbing. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Then, around 2 a.m., the eastern wall began to move, subtle at first, just a slight rippling effect, like fabric in a gentle breeze. As time passed, the movement became more pronounced, the wall pulsing in a rhythm that matched the breathing I'd heard. At 3:07 a.m., Sarah appeared on camera, walking directly to the wall as if drawn there. When she placed her hand against it, the pulsing intensified, And then came the moment when the wall began to bulge outward toward her. But the most chilling part was what happened after I pulled Sarah away, and we left the basement. The camera continued recording, and about 10 minutes after we'd gone, a hand pail, elongated, with too many joints in the fingers, emerged from the hole in the wall. It groped blindly in the air for a moment before retreating back into the darkness. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw this. There was no rational explanation, no way to dismiss what I'd seen as a trick of light or camera malfunction. Something was living behind that wall. Something was trying to get out. I spent the rest of the morning researching, desperate for information that might explain what was happening in our home. I found scattered references to the Aldrich cult in obscure occult forums and local history blogs. According to these sources, Thomas Aldrich hadn't been merely a successful merchant, he'd been the leader of a small but devoted group that practiced necromancy. The cult believed that the boundary between life and death was thinnest at certain locations, places where multiple deaths had occurred, or where bodies had been buried. They would build structures at these locations and conduct rituals designed to create permanent passages between the world of the living and whatever lay beyond. One account claimed that Aldrich had built his house specifically over a thin spot in the boundary, the former cemetery. The basement, being closest to the earth where the bodies had lain, was supposedly the focal point of his efforts. I was deep in this disturbing research when my phone rang. It was our real estate agent. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice artificially bright. "I'm just calling to check how you and Mrs. Reynolds are settling into the house." "Actually," I said, "I've been meaning to ask you something. Why didn't you tell us about the history of this property? About it being built on a cemetery? About the Aldrich cult?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its cheerful veneer. "I'm legally obligated to disclose material facts about the property," she said carefully. "Historical rumors and local superstitions don't fall under that requirement." "What about the previous owners?" I pressed. "Why did they leave after only 8 months?" Another pause. "They had personal reasons." "Did those personal reasons have anything to do with noises in the basement? Or sleepwalking? Or things coming through the walls?" My voice had risen, and I made an effort to calm myself. "Reynolds," she said, her tone now cold and professional, "I understand moving into a new home can be stressful. Perhaps you and your wife might benefit from a few days away while you adjust." "You knew," I accused. "You knew there was something wrong with this house." "I need to go," she said abruptly. "I have another appointment. Please give my best to Mrs. Reynolds." The line went dead before I could respond. I spent the rest of the day in a state of increasing anxiety, torn between wanting to pack our bags and flee immediately, and needing to understand exactly what we were dealing with. By the time Sarah came home from work, I had made a decision. We need to look behind that wall. I told her after explaining everything, the breathing, her sleepwalking, the camera footage, and my research. To her credit, Sarah didn't dismiss my concerns or suggest I was overreacting. She watched the video from the basement camera with growing horror, especially the part showing the strange hand emerging from the wall. "What do you think it is?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever's happening, it's getting worse. The wall is getting thinner, just like you said last night." I said that. She shuddered. "I don't remember any of it." We agreed to investigate together, armed with tools, flashlights, and our phones set to record video. We descended into the basement. The eastern wall looked different in the harsh light of day, the bulging more pronounced, the small hole I'd made now a jagged tear about a foot wide. As we approached, the familiar sound of breathing emanated from behind the wall, multiple breaths, out of sync, creating a disorienting chorus. "My God," Sarah whispered. "It's exactly like in my dreams." I stepped forward with a crowbar, intending to pry away more of the drywall and expose whatever was behind it. But as the metal tool touched the surface, the breathing suddenly stopped. There was a moment of complete silence, and then a new sound emerged, a low, wet chuckle that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight with fear, "I think we should." I never finished the sentence. The wall in front of us suddenly split open, not crumbling like drywall should, but tearing like flesh, revealing a dark pulsating space beyond. The opening widened, stretching like a mouth, and from within that impossible space came a rush of cold, foul air that smelled of earth and decay. Sarah screamed, backing away. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing, because it wasn't stone or earth behind the wall. It was a vast, organic chamber, its walls lined with what looked like wet, glistening tissue. And moving within that chamber were shapes human-like but wrong, their limbs too long, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. One of them lurched toward the opening, its pale face pressing against the threshold between its world and ours. Its eyes were milky white, its mouth a gaping hole that opened impossibly wide as it let out a rattling breath. "Run!" I finally managed to shout, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her toward the stairs. We fled the basement, slamming the door behind us. Without discussion, we continued out the front door to our car, neither of us willing to remain in the house a moment longer. That night we stayed in a motel on the outskirts of town. We discussed our options in hushed voices, both still shaken by what we'd witnessed. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it all, to convince myself that stress and suggestion had caused us to hallucinate or misinterpret ordinary phenomena. But I knew what I had seen, what we had both seen. "We can't go back there," Sarah said, her face pale in the harsh fluorescent light of the motel room. "No," I agreed. "But we can't just leave it like this either. Whatever's behind that wall, whatever's trying to come through, it's not going to stop just because we're gone." We decided to contact a local priest the next morning. Father Morales listened to our story without interruption, his weathered face grave. When we finished, he didn't question our sanity or offer rational explanations. Instead, he nodded slowly. "The Aldridge house," he said quietly. "The church has been aware of that property for generations. There have been incidents before." He explained that Thomas Aldridge had indeed been involved in occult practices, specifically attempting to create a permanent doorway between our world and what he called the waiting place, a realm where souls that couldn't pass on resided. "The boundary between worlds is naturally thin in some locations," Father Morales explained. "Places of great suffering or death often create these thin spots. The cemetery that once occupied your property was one such place. Aldridge didn't choose that location by accident. So what do we do?" Sarah asked. "The doorway must be sealed," he said firmly. "Properly this time. Previous attempts have only been temporary measures." 2 days later, Father Morales arrived at our house accompanied by 2 other priests and a woman he introduced as Miss Chen, an expert in metaphysical architecture. They brought with them an array of religious items, herbs, and several bags of a concrete mixture that Miss Chen explained had been specially prepared. "The barrier has been weakened over decades," she told us as we stood on the front lawn, reluctant to enter the house. "Each time someone lives here, the entities on the other side attempt to influence them, to make them remove the barriers, or to use them as conduits." "Is that what happened to me?" Sarah asked. "With the sleepwalking?" Mr. Chen nodded grimly. "They were trying to use you to come through. Your husband interrupted the process. Fortunately, the ritual that followed was both exhausting and terrifying." The priests blessed every room in the house, working their way down to the basement. Mr. Chen examined the eastern wall, now bulging outward in multiple places, the tear in its surface wider than before, as they began their work chanting prayers. While Mr. Chen prepared the special concrete to seal the opening, the house seemed to fight back. The temperature plummeted. Objects fell from shelves. The breathing from behind the wall grew louder, more desperate, accompanied by scratching and pounding. When Mr. Chen approached the tier with the first trowel of concrete, a howling sound emerged from the opening. Not a single voice, but many, blending together in a chorus of rage and despair. The wall rippled violently, and several pale, elongated hands thrust through the tier, grasping at the air. Father Morales stepped forward, holding a crucifix before him. "By the authority of Christ, I command you to retreat," he intoned,
his voice steady despite the supernatural display before him. The hands recoiled as if burned, withdrawing into the darkness beyond the wall. Miss Chen worked quickly, applying the concrete mixture to the edges of the tier. As the substance made contact with the wall, it sizzled and steamed, giving off an acrid smell. For hours they worked, sealing every crack and bulge in the wall, while the priests maintained a continuous prayer. Gradually the resistance lessened, the breathing behind the wall grew fainter. The temperature in the basement slowly returned to normal. By nightfall, the eastern wall of our basement looked ordinary again, smooth and solid, with no sign of the horror that had nearly broken through. Miss Chen applied a final layer of a clear substance she described as a binding agent over the entire wall. "This will hold," she assured us, though the weariness in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely confident. "But this house will never be truly safe. The boundary here will always be weak." We sold the house a month later, taking a significant financial loss. The new owners were a young couple excited about their first home purchase. I wanted to warn them to tell them about the breathing in the basement and what lurked behind the eastern wall, but Father Morales advised against it. "The seal will hold for many years," he said, "perhaps their entire lifetime." Warning them would only make them curious, and curiosity is dangerous in a place like that. It attracts attention from the other side. So we said nothing, other than a casual suggestion that the basement might make a good storage area, but probably wasn't worth finishing as living space. We moved 3 states away to a new house built just 5 years ago on land that had previously been nothing but farm fields. Sometimes in the dead of night, I still wake up suddenly, convinced I can hear breathing coming from somewhere inside our walls. Sarah no longer sleepwalks, but she often murmurs in her sleep words I can't quite make out, but which leave me uneasy. And sometimes, when I'm alone in our new home, I find myself pressing my ear against the walls, listening, just to be sure, because once you've heard that breathing, once you know what can exist in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond, you never stop listening for it. I never told Sarah, but before we left our old house, I took one last trip to the basement. I stood before the newly sealed eastern wall and placed my hand against its surface. It was warm to the touch, and beneath my palm, I felt the faintest rhythm like a heartbeat, slow but persistent. They're still there, waiting, and the wall, no matter how well sealed, is growing thinner every day.
Story 4. I've always been a night owl. Even as a child, I would stay up well past my bedtime, staring out my window at the stars or reading books under my covers with a flashlight. So when I got older and needed a job that would accommodate my college schedule, working as a night shift taxi driver seemed perfect. The city transforms after midnight, streets empty out, traffic lights blink yellow, and there's a stillness that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. My cab was nothing special, a decade-old Crown Victoria with squeaky brakes and a perpetual smell of pine air freshener that never quite masked the lingering scent of previous passengers. But it was reliable, and that's all that mattered for those long nights cruising the empty streets, waiting for the occasional drunk who needed a ride home, or the early morning airport run. The radio was my constant companion during those solitary hours. I had my regular stations: classic rock for when I needed to stay alert, smooth jazz when I wanted to relax, and talk radio for when I craved the sound of human voices. Nothing unusual about any of it, until that first night in October when everything changed. It was a Tuesday just after midnight. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, creating a hypnotic pattern on my windshield as I drove through downtown. I had just dropped off a passenger, a bartender heading home after his shift, and was cruising along the empty streets looking for my next fare. The classic rock station I had been listening to started to fade into static, which wasn't unusual in certain parts of town, where reception got spotty. I reached over to adjust the dial, scanning for something clearer. The static continued across most frequencies until suddenly it cleared, and a warm, deep voice filled the cab. "Good evening, night owls and insomniacs. You're tuned to 87.6 FM, the frequency that only exists after midnight. I'm your host, Jackson Miles, and you're listening to the Midnight Hour." I frowned, glancing at the radio display. 87.6 FM. That couldn't be right. FM radio frequencies in the US only go from 88.1 to 7. Yet the display clearly showed those numbers, glowing an unusual shade of blue rather than the standard green. It's 12:17 a.m. on this rainy October night, the voice continued, and we've got a special program for you lonely souls wandering the darkness. Up next, a little tune from 1972 that never got the recognition it deserved. The song that began playing was unlike anything I'd heard before, a haunting melody with lyrics about shadows and streetlights that seemed eerily appropriate for my current situation. I found myself tapping along on the steering wheel, oddly captivated. When the song ended, the DJ returned. That was Midnight Wanderer by the Hollow Men. A shame they disappeared after recording that single. Wouldn't you agree? Now let's take a call from one of our listeners out there in the night. There was a brief moment of static, and then another voice came through, hesitant, confused. Hello, am I on the air? You certainly are, the DJ replied smoothly. What's your name, friend of the night? Tom. I'm driving on Highway 16, heading home from a late shift, and I don't understand how I'm on your show. I didn't call in. The DJ chuckled, a sound that somehow made the hair on my arm stand up. The midnight hour reaches out to those who need it, Tom. You didn't call us, we called you. Now tell me, what's troubling you tonight? I listened, fascinated, as this stranger named Tom began pouring out his heart about his failing marriage, his financial troubles, his feelings of hopelessness. It was intimate in a way that made me feel like I was eavesdropping on a therapy session. The DJ listened patiently, occasionally offering insights that seemed almost supernaturally perceptive. Take the next exit. Tom, the DJ said finally, the one coming up in 2 miles. There's a diner there called Maggie's. Go inside. Someone's waiting who can help you. What? Who's waiting? Tom asked. You'll know when you see them. Trust me on this. Tom, sometimes the universe aligns in strange ways, especially after midnight. The call ended, and another song began playing, this one from the 1950s, according to the DJ's introduction that followed. I continued driving, telling myself I should change the station, but feeling strangely compelled to keep listening. 3 more calls followed the same pattern, people who hadn't intentionally called in, each receiving eerily specific advice from the smooth-voiced DJ. One woman was told to check her basement when she got home, where she would find a leak that, if left unaddressed, would cause major damage by morning. A college student was advised to switch his major from business to literature, where his true talents lay. An elderly man was told that the recurring dream he'd been having was a message from his late wife, and was given specific instructions on where to find a letter she had hidden before her death. It was all very strange, but I rationalized it as some elaborate radio show gimmick, actors playing the parts of callers, perhaps. The kind of entertainment designed specifically for people alone on the roads in the middle of the night. Then at exactly 1:13 a.m., the DJ's voice took on a different tone. We have a special listener with us tonight, a night owl who's been with us from the beginning of our broadcast. Let's say hello to Daniel. Daniel Wilson, driving cab number 42 through the rain-slicked streets of downtown. I merely swerved into the next lane. That was my name. My cab number. How could he possibly know that? Daniel, I know you're listening, though you haven't called in. You're wondering how I know who you are. Let's just say that the midnight hour has ways of finding those who need to hear what we have to say. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel now. This had to be some kind of prank. Maybe one of my friends had set this up somehow, or maybe the radio station had spotters around town who had seen my cab. You're looking for an explanation, Daniel, but I'm afraid there isn't one that would satisfy your rational mind. What matters is the message I have for you tonight. I found myself responding out loud, alone in my cab. What message? As if he had heard me, the DJ continued. Your passenger at 1:47 a.m. will request a ride to 1418 Lakeside Drive. Under no circumstances should you take them there. The address exists, but what awaits there isn't what it appears to be. Refuse the fare if you must, but do not drive to Lakeside tonight. A chill ran down my spine. This was beyond creepy now. I reached for the dial to change the station, but as my fingers touched the knob, the radio emitted a high-pitched squeal that made me jerk my hand back. Changing the station won't change what's coming, Daniel, the DJ said, his voice now lower, almost a whisper. I'm trying to help you. Remember 47 a.m. No rides to Lakeside Drive. Another song began playing, this one a melancholy piano piece that I didn't recognize. I finally managed to change the station, finding comfort in the familiar tunes of my usual classic rock channel. I tried to laugh it off clearly. I was tired and my imagination was running wild. Maybe I had even dozed off for a moment and dreamed the whole bizarre radio show. But when I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, a fresh wave of unease washed over me. It was 1:32 a.m. The specific time mentioned by the DJ, 1:47 a.m., was just 15 minutes away. This is ridiculous, I muttered to myself, turning up the volume on Hotel California, as if to drown out my own thoughts. Complete coincidence. Or I'm more tired than I realized. I decided to take a break, pulling into an all-night diner to grab some coffee. The place was nearly empty, just a waitress scrolling through her phone behind the counter, and a solitary truck driver hunched over a plate of eggs in the corner. I ordered my coffee to go, making small talk with the waitress about the weather while trying to ignore the nervous energy building inside me. When I got back to my cab, it was 4:43 a.m. Despite my best efforts to dismiss the strange radio broadcast, I found myself watching the minutes tick by with growing apprehension. 1:44. At exactly 1:47 a.m., my radio crackled to life, not the music station I had left it on, but the impossible 87.6 FM. It's time, Daniel, the DJ's voice said softly. Remember what I told you? Before I could react, my phone rang. The app I used for ride requests was alerting me to a new passenger. With trembling fingers, I checked the details. The pickup location was just 2 blocks away at the corner of 9th and Pine. The destination made my blood run cold, 14118 Lakeside Drive. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence, a bizarre, impossible coincidence. Or maybe I was being pranked on an elaborate scale. Either way, I needed to know what was going on. I accepted the ride and drove to the pickup location, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the corner, I saw a figure standing under a street light, a man in a dark overcoat, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He raised his hand as I approached, confirming he was my passenger. I pulled over, fighting the urge to drive past him and never look back. The man opened the back door and slid into the seat. In my rearview mirror, I could only make out the lower half of his face, pale skin and thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. 1418 Lakeside Drive, please, he said, his voice oddly formal and precise. I cleared my throat. I'm sorry, but I can't take you there. There was a pause, and then, may I ask why not? What could I say? That a mysterious DJ on an impossible radio frequency had warned me not to. I opted for a more practical excuse. There's been some flooding in that area due to the rain. Roads are closed. The man leaned forward slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes in the mirror, dark and intense. That's strange. I just came from that direction, and the roads were perfectly clear. My mouth went dry. I'm afraid I still can't take you there. Perhaps another driver. I specifically requested you, Daniel, the man interrupted, his voice hardening. Cab number 42, the night owl who listens to frequencies that don't exist. The cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Who are you? The man settled back into his seat. Just a passenger who needs to get to Lakeside Drive. But since you're being difficult, perhaps we can compromise. Take me as close as you're willing to go and I'll walk the rest of the way. Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. My instincts were screaming at me to kick this man out of my cab, but fear kept me frozen in place. What if he became violent? We were alone on a deserted street in the middle of the night. Fine. I said finally. "I'll take you to the edge of the lakeside district. That's as far as I go. That will suffice," the man replied, sounding pleased. As I pulled away from the curb, my radio suddenly turned on by itself, the volume increasing until the cab was filled with static. Through the white noise, I could barely make out the DJ's voice. "Daniel, wrong choice. Danger." The man in the back seat reached forward and turned off the radio with a quick, decisive movement. Such interference. Annoying, isn't it? Some voices should know when to stay silent. We drove in tense silence after that. I took a roundabout route, partly to delay our arrival, and partly because I was hoping to see another person, another car, anything that might make me feel less isolated with this stranger. But the streets remained eerily empty, as if the entire city had been evacuated without my knowledge. As we approached the lakeside district, the rain intensified, pounding against the roof of the cab like impatient fingers. The streetlights seemed dimmer here, many of them flickering or completely dark. I had driven through this neighborhood countless times before, but tonight it felt unfamiliar, almost as if the streets had rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking. "This is as far as I go," I announced, pulling over at the corner of Lakeside Avenue and Elm Street, still several blocks from the specific address he had requested. "Very well," the man said. He made no move to exit the cab, however. Instead, he leaned forward again, his face coming into clearer view in my rearview mirror. There was something wrong with his features. They seemed somehow fluid, as if I was looking at him underwater. "You made a wise choice listening to your radio friend, Daniel," he said softly, "but only half wise. You should have refused the fare entirely." "What do you want from me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing that you haven't already given. You've brought me close enough." He reached into his coat and pulled out something that looked like an old-fashioned pocket watch. "It's 2:13 a.m. now. By 3,000, it will be done." "What will be done?" The man smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "The crossing. Your radio friend has been trying to prevent it for decades. Every night, he warns someone like you about someone like me. Sometimes he succeeds. Often he fails. Tonight, well, we'll see." He opened the car door, letting in a gust of cold, damp air. "No charge for the ride, Daniel Wilson. Consider it a gift from one night owl to another." As he stepped out into the rain, I caught a final glimpse of his face, or rather, the absence of one, where features should have been. There was only a swirling darkness like smoke contained within the outline of a human head. The door slammed shut, and I immediately locked all the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely operate the controls. Through the rain-streaked windows, I watched the figure walk away, seeming to fade into the darkness between streetlights. As soon as he was out of sight, my radio came back to life, tuning itself to 87.6 FM. The static was heavy, but the DJ's voice broke through, urgent and clear. "Daniel, listen carefully. You've brought him too close to the threshold. 1418 Lakeside Drive isn't a residence. It's a weak point between worlds. Every 50 years, the boundary thins enough for crossing, but only if they have a guide. You were meant to be that guide. I didn't take him all the way there." I protested, as if the DJ could hear me. "He doesn't need you anymore," the voice continued, confirming my suspicion that this was indeed a two-way conversation somehow. "You got him past the wards I placed around the district. Now you need to stop him before he reaches the house. If that door opens at 3,000 a.m., what comes through won't be just him. It will be all of them." "Who is them? What is he?" I demanded. "There's no time to explain. In the glove compartment of your cab, there's something that wasn't there before. Take it and go after him. You have less than 40 minutes." With trembling hands, I opened the glove compartment. Among the usual clutter of napkins, vehicle registration and insurance papers was something new, an antique silver pocket watch, identical in design to the one the strange passenger had shown me, but where his had been dark and tarnished. This one gleamed as if recently polished. "The watch is attuned to his presence," the DJ explained. "The closer you get to him, the warmer it will become. When you find him, You must use it to bind him. Open the watch, speak his true name, and close it before he can react. I don't know his true name, I said, panic rising in my throat. You heard it on the radio earlier tonight. Think, Daniel. One of the songs I played the artist. My mind raced through the broadcast I had heard. The first song, something about midnight wanderers, by a group called the Hollow Men. Hollow Man, I guessed, close, in singular form. Now go, Daniel. The boundary grows thinner with each passing minute. The radio went silent, leaving me alone with the sound of rain and my own ragged breathing. Part of me wanted to start the car and drive as far from Lakeside as possible. This wasn't my problem. I was just a cab driver trying to make ends meet while finishing my degree, but another part of me, the part that had always been drawn to the night, to the mysteries that exist in darkness, knew I couldn't walk away. Whatever was happening, I was involved now, whether I liked it or not. I grabbed the silver watch and stepped out into the rain. It was coming down in sheets now, reducing visibility to just a few yards ahead. The watch in my hand was cool to the touch, suggesting my passenger was already some distance away. I began walking in the direction he had gone, toward the heart of the Lakeside district. The streets were eerily quiet, no cars, no pedestrians, not even the usual urban wildlife. It was as if this entire section of the city had been placed under some kind of spell, isolated from the normal world. As I walked, the watch gradually began to warm in my palm. I was heading in the right direction. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead and soaked through my jacket, but I barely noticed the discomfort, focused entirely on the growing heat of the silver timepiece. The houses in this area were old and grand, set back from the street behind iron fences and overgrown gardens. Most were dark, but occasionally I would pass one with a single light burning in an upstairs window, like a lonely sentinel, keeping watch over the night. The watch was growing hotter now, almost uncomfortable to hold. I must be getting close. I slowed my pace, trying to move as quietly as possible, despite the rain-slick sidewalk and my squeaking shoes. Up ahead I could make out the silhouette of a large Victorian house, set apart from its neighbors. Even through the rain, I could see the number mounted beside the front door, 1418, the threshold the DJ had mentioned. My passenger was standing at the gate, his back to me. He seemed to be speaking, though I couldn't see anyone else present. The watch in my hand was now so hot, I had to shift it from palm to avoid being burned. I crept closer, trying to hear what he was saying over the sound of the rain. His words were in no language I recognized, a series of harsh, guttural sounds that made my ears hurt and my vision blur. With each syllable, the air around the house seemed to distort, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The gate swung open without being touched, and the figure started up the path toward the front door. It was now or never. Hollow Man, I called out, fumbling with the watch to open it. The figure froze, then slowly turned toward me. What I saw wasn't a face, wasn't even the swirling darkness I had glimpsed earlier. It was absence, a hole in reality shaped like a human head. Daniel Wilson, it said, its voice somehow coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The night owl who couldn't resist a mystery. You should have taken me all the way to the door. It would have been easier for you, quicker. I finally managed to open the watch. Inside was not the expected clock face, but a small mirror that reflected nothing. Not my face, not the rain, not even the strange figure standing before me. Your radio friend has meddled for the last time, the Hollow Man said, taking a step toward me. After tonight, there will be no more broadcasts on 87, no more warnings. No more interference, Hollow Man, I repeated, more firmly this time, holding the open watch toward him like a shield. He laughed, a sound like wind rushing through an empty tunnel. That's not my true name. Night Owl, your friend has misled you. And now you've run out of time. A distant church bell began to toll the hour. 3 o'clock. The Hollow Man turned back toward the house, where the front door was now slowly swinging open. Beyond it was not the interior of a house, but a swirling vortex of darkness, punctuated by what looked like distant stars, or perhaps eyes. The crossing begins, the Hollow Man intoned, and you are here to witness it. Perhaps that was your purpose all along. Desperation seized me. The watch was burning in my hand, the mirror inside now showing strange, shifting images, faces contorted in pain, landscapes that couldn't exist on Earth, and for a brief moment, a radio studio where a man sat before a microphone. His eyes closed in concentration. Jackson Miles. The DJ's name. Jackson Miles. I shouted, not knowing if it would work, but having no other options. The effect was immediate and shocking. The hollow man let out a screech that threatened to shatter my eardrums, and the watch in my hand vibrated violently. The mirror inside began to glow with an intense white light that cut through the darkness of the night. "Close it!" a voice commanded, the DJ's voice, somehow emanating from the watch itself. "Close it now, Daniel." With a snap, I shut the watch. The hollow man's scream cut off abruptly, and a force like a sudden vacuum pulled at me, nearly knocking me off my feet. The figure that had been standing on the path was gone, and the front door of 1418 Lakeside Drive slammed shut with such force that I heard wood splinter. Then silence. The rain had stopped, though I hadn't noticed when. The watch in my hand was cool again, and when I cautiously opened it, it showed an ordinary clock face, the hands pointing to exactly 3:10. I stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Was it over? Had I somehow prevented whatever crossing the hollow man had been attempting? My questions were answered by the sudden crackle of my phone, a text message notification. From an unknown number, it read simply, "Well done, Night Owl. The threshold holds for another 50 years. Keep the watch, you may need it again someday. And tune in any time after midnight. I'll be waiting. James." I made my way back to my cab on shaky legs, the silver watch clutched tightly in my hand. By the time I reached it, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The night shift was over. As I started the engine, the radio came to life one last time, tuning itself to 87.6 FM. Through minimal static, the smooth voice of Jackson Miles spoke directly to me. "Until we meet again, Daniel Wilson. Remember, some frequencies only exist after midnight, and some stories are only told in the dark. Drive safely, Night Owl." The radio returned to my usual classic rock station, playing a morning power hour to wake up early commuters. I sat there for a moment, then carefully placed the silver watch in my pocket. Whatever had happened tonight, whatever I had become involved in, I had a feeling it wasn't over. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the lightening sky. For just a moment I thought I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, a man in a wide-brimmed hat. But when I blinked, there was nothing there but empty street. Some stories are only told in the dark, and some passengers should never reach their destination. Story 5. I still remember the day we moved out of my childhood home. I was 8 years old, clutching my favorite stuffed bear as the movers carried the last of our furniture into their truck. The old Victorian house had been in our family for generations, its maze-like corridors and oddly angled rooms, both fascinating and frightening to my young mind. As we drove away, I turned in my seat to watch the house disappear around the corner, not knowing it would be 30 years before I would see it again. Life moved on as it tends to do. I grew up, went to college, built a career in architectural restoration, perhaps influenced by those early years surrounded by crown molding and ornate banisters. When the call came that my great-aunt had passed and left the house to me, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and dread. I hadn't thought about the old place in years, yet somehow it had never truly left me. The first time I returned to the house, standing alone on the overgrown lawn, with the key heavy in my palm, I experienced the oddest sensation, like putting on an old sweater, only to find it doesn't fit quite right anymore. The house loomed before me, its Victorian grandeur diminished by peeling paint and sagging gutters, yet still imposing against the autumn sky. Just clean it up and sell it. My wife had suggested before I left. No need to get sentimental about a drafty old house. Practical advice, certainly. The property values in the area had skyrocketed, and a quick renovation could yield a substantial profit. Yet as I pushed open the front door, hearing the familiar creak of hinges that needed oiling. I felt something pull at me, a sense of unfinished business. The interior was exactly as I remembered, if dustier and more decrepit. The grand staircase curved up from the foyer, the banister worn smooth from generations of hands. The parlor to the right still had the antique piano my grandmother used to play, now silent under a sheet. To the left, the formal dining room with its built-in china cabinets stood empty, waiting for family gatherings that would never come again. I spent that first day just wandering through the rooms, reacquainting myself with the house's peculiarities, the way the third step from the top always groaned under any weight, the stubborn window in the kitchen that needed a specific jiggle to open, the strange acoustics of the second-floor landing that seemed to capture and amplify whispers from throughout the house. It wasn't until I reached the second-floor hallway that I felt that strange dissonance against wronger this time, like an itch in my brain I couldn't scratch. Something was wrong, something was missing. I stood at the end of the long corridor, staring at the blank wall before me, my mind struggling to reconcile what I saw with what I somehow expected to see. According to the floor plan I'd found in my great-aunt's papers, there should be another room here, a bedroom, or perhaps a study, but the hallway simply ended in a flat, papered wall. I ran my hand over the faded floral wallpaper, feeling nothing but solid plaster beneath. Had the architect made an error on the plans? Was there dead space behind this wall? An architectural anomaly in an already unusual house. That night, sleeping in my childhood bedroom for the first time in 3 decades, I dreamed of corridors that shifted and changed when I wasn't looking. In the dream, I kept returning to that blank wall at the end of the hallway, knowing there was something beyond it if I could just remember how to get there. A voice, distant but clear, repeated the same phrase over and over. "Remember the blue door." I woke with a start, the phrase still echoing in my mind. Blue door. Had there been a blue door in the house? I couldn't recall one, but the house had been repainted several times over the years, perhaps under layers of more recent paint. Over breakfast, a hastily assembled meal eaten at the dusty kitchen counter. I tried to dismiss the dream. I had a full day of work ahead, cataloging repairs needed before putting the house on the market. Yet I found myself drawn back to that second-floor hallway, staring at the blank wall as if willing it to reveal its secrets. On the third day, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found a photo album I didn't recognize. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. Inside were photos of our family from when I was very young, birthday parties, Christmases, ordinary moments preserved in fading color. I flipped through idly until a particular image made me freeze. There I was, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, standing proudly in front of a door. A blue door, my small hand was on the knob, and I was grinning at the camera as if about to reveal a wonderful secret. Behind me, partially visible, was the second-floor hallway. I stared at the photo, my heart suddenly racing. This was impossible. There was no door there. I had just checked this morning. Yet here was photographic evidence that not only had such a door existed, but I had known about it, had stood before it, had apparently been about to open it. Why couldn't I remember this door? More importantly, what had happened to it? I called my mother that evening, trying to keep my voice casual as I asked about the layout of the old house. "Mom, was there ever a room at the end of the upstairs hallway?" Past my bedroom, there was a pause on the line longer than seemed natural. "No," she finally said, her voice oddly flat. "Just the wall. There's always been just the wall there." "Are you sure? I found an old photo today, and it looks like there might have been a door." "There was no door, Michael." Her tone was sharp now, uncharacteristically so. "I don't know what photo you're talking about, but you must be mistaken." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me more confused than before. I pulled out the photo again, studying it in the dim light of the bedside lamp. There was no mistake, that was definitely me. Definitely the hallway, definitely a blue door where now there was only wallpaper. That night, my dreams were more vivid. I was a child again, standing before the blue door. I could hear muffled sounds from the other side, music perhaps, or laughter. My small hand reached for the knob, turned it, pushed the door open to reveal I woke up gasping, the dream dissolving before I could see what lay beyond the door. Outside my window, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. I lay there for a moment, trying to capture the fading fragments of the dream, but they slipped away like smoke between my fingers. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the restoration work, hoping physical labor would quiet my increasingly obsessive thoughts about the blue door. I repaired loose floorboards, patched leaky pipes, and began stripping decades of paint from the ornate woodwork. But no matter how exhausted I made myself, each night brought the same dream, the blue door. My hand on the knob, the tantalizing sounds from beyond, and then wakefulness before I could see what waited on the other side. A week into my stay, I decided to contact some of my childhood friends who had visited the house. Surely one of them would remember if there had been another room, another door. My old friend David was the first to respond to my email. "Hey, great to hear from you. The old Victorian on Maple Street, right? Man, that place was like a castle to us kids. So many rooms to play hide and seek in. But I don't remember any blue door at the end of the hallway. Just that weird blank wall with the creepy wallpaper. Remember how we used to dare each other to stand there with our backs to it for as long as possible? Good times." His response only deepened the mystery. Not only did David not remember a blue door, but he specifically remembered the blank wall, and apparently we had found it unsettling enough to turn it into a childhood dare. Yet I had no recollection of this game, just as I had no recollection of the blue door that clearly existed in the photograph. That afternoon, I found myself standing before the wall again, studying it with newfound intensity. The wallpaper was faded and peeling in places, a floral pattern that might once have been cheerful, but now looked sickly in the dusty light. On impulse, I pressed my palm against it, applying gentle pressure. The wall felt solid, unyielding. But then, was it my imagination? Or did I feel something shift slightly beneath my hand? I pressed harder, moving my palm across the surface of the wall. There is subtle difference in texture. A barely perceptible seam running vertically from floor to ceiling. I might never have noticed it if I hadn't been looking so intently. My heart pounding, I fetched a utility knife from my toolbox and carefully began to cut along the seam, peeling back the wallpaper. Beneath it was another layer of paper, and beneath that, another. How many times had this wall been papered over the decades? I continued cutting, working methodically, revealing more and more of what lay beneath. After the fifth layer of wallpaper, my knife suddenly hit something different wood. I stepped back, staring at the small rectangle of exposed material. It was painted, though the color was impossible to determine under the dim hallway light and years of wallpaper paste. With renewed energy, I began clearing more wallpaper, revealing more of the wooden surface beneath. It took hours, my fingers becoming raw and cramped, but eventually I had exposed enough to confirm my suspicion. There was indeed a door here, deliberately concealed beneath multiple layers of wallpaper. And as I cleared the last section around what would be the door frame, I could see traces of blue paint clinging to the wood. The blue door, it was real. But why had it been hidden, and why did no one seem to remember it? By nightfall I had removed all the wallpaper covering the door, revealing it fully for what must have been the first time in decades. It was a simple door, residential in style, with a brass knob tarnished almost black with age. The blue paint was faded and chipped, but still recognizable as a deep royal blue, exactly as it had appeared in the photograph. I stood before it, suddenly hesitant. Now that I had found the door, I wasn't sure I wanted to open it. What if there was a reason it had been sealed away, forgotten? What if my family had hidden it deliberately, but my curiosity was too strong to resist? Taking a deep breath, I grasped the knob and turned it. It moved stiffly, reluctantly, but it did move. I pushed, feeling the door resist for a moment before it swung inward with a low, pained creak. The room beyond was dark, the air inside stale and undisturbed. I fumbled for my phone, switching on its flashlight to illuminate the space. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a perfectly preserved child's bedroom. A small bed with a faded quilt, a wooden toy chest, bookshelves filled with children's books, a rocking horse in one corner. Everything covered in a thick layer of dust, but otherwise untouched, as if the occupant had just stepped out and might return at any moment. My room. It was my room, or rather, a second version of it. The furniture was different from what I remembered, the arrangement unfamiliar, but the toys and books were mine. I recognized my childhood teddy bear, sitting on the pillow, though I was certain that same bear was currently in a storage box in my attic at home. In the center of the room stood something that didn't belong in a child's bedroom, a full-length antique mirror in an ornate gold frame. Its surface was cloudy with age, reflecting the beam of my flashlight as a diffuse glow rather than a sharp point of light. I stepped into the room, my footprints marking the dusty floor. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the room had been sealed not just from light and fresh air but from time itself. I moved slowly toward the mirror, drawn to it despite a growing sense of unease. As I approached, I realized that what I had taken for cloudiness was actually something else. The mirror wasn't reflecting the room I was standing in. Instead of seeing myself in the child's bedroom behind me, I saw a different room entirely. A room with dark wood paneling, shelves lined with strange objects, and a large desk covered in papers. I raised my hand, and the reflection did the same, but it wasn't my hand. It was smaller, paler, with nails bitten to the quick. I stepped closer, and the figure in the mirror did too, until I could see my face clearly. It was me, but not me. A version of me as a child, perhaps 8 years old, wearing pajamas I didn't recognize, with an expression of solemn intensity I couldn't recall ever having worn. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the small toy chest. This was impossible. Mirrors didn't work this way. Yet the evidence was before my eyes. This was no ordinary mirror, and what it showed was no ordinary reflection. My gaze fell on the small desk in the corner of the room, where a child's journal lay open. Moving closer, I saw pages filled with careful, childish handwriting. I recognized it as my own from that age. The distinctive way I formed my capital bones, the slightly slanted lines. Picking up the journal, I began to read. Dear Diary, I saw them again today. The other family, they live in the mirror in the blue room. They look like us but different. The other mirror's nice. He says they have a better house than ours with no scary parts. He says I can come live with them if I want to. I flipped through more pages, my hands trembling. Dear Diary, Mom and Dad don't believe me about the mirror family. They say it's just my imagination. But I know they're real. The other me showed me his toys today. They're better than mine. Dear Diary, the other me says their house is always warm, and they have ice cream every day. He says I can cross over anytime I want. I just have to want it enough. Dear Diary, I'm scared of the blue room now. The other me doesn't smile anymore. Last night I woke up, and he was standing in the mirror watching me sleep. His eyes looked different. When I told Mom, she got really quiet and made me promise not to go in the blue room anymore. The final entry, dated just days before we had moved out of the house 30 years ago, sent a chill down my spine. Dear Diary, we're moving away tomorrow. Dad says it's for his new job, but I heard Mom talking on the phone. She said, it's getting stronger and the barrier is thinning and we have to get Michael away from it. I think she means the mirror. The other me is angry we're leaving. He said, it doesn't matter how far we go, he'll find a way to reach me someday. I'm scared. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. Memories were surfacing now, fragmented, dreamlike but undeniably real. The blue room, the mirror, the other me with his too wide smile and eyes that sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, didn't look human at all. I remembered now why we had really left this house, not for my father's job, as I'd always been told, but because of what was happening in this room, because of what was trying to come through that mirror. I should leave. I should seal this room back up, Pretend I'd never found it, sell the house and never return. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, I found myself moving toward the mirror again, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The child in the reflection watched me approach, its expression unreadable. As I stood before the mirror, our eyes locked, mine weary and lined with age. His young but somehow ancient. "You came back," the reflection said, its lips moving in perfect synchronization with the words I heard in my head, rather than with my ears. "After all this time, you finally came back to me. What are you?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The child me smiled, expression that stretched too wide for a human face. "I'm you, of course. The you that could have been. The you that still can be. What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted." The reflection pressed its small hand against the glass. "To come through. To be real." I felt a strange compulsion to mirror the gesture, to place my hand against the glass opposite his. I resisted, clenching my hands into fists at my sides. "They tried to keep us apart," the reflection continued, its voice taking on a petulant tone. "They covered the door, made you forget me. But I knew you'd come back someday. I've been waiting so patiently. I'm not going to help you," I said, taking a step back. "Whatever you are, you don't belong here." The reflection's face contorted with sudden rage, its features blurring slightly as if struggling to maintain human form. "I belong here more than you do. This was supposed to be my life. They promised me." "Who promised you?" I asked, taking another step back. "The ones who made me," it hissed. "The ones who needed a vessel. Your great-grandmother made a deal. You know, she wanted a child so badly. They gave her one, your grandfather, but deals have prices. They were supposed to get me in return." Away in a door, cold horror washed over me as the implications became clear. My family's history, the house passed down through generations, the room that everyone seemed determined to forget. That's why the house came to me. I realized aloud. "You've been waiting for me specifically. The last of the bloodline." The reflection's smile returned, cruel and knowing. "Smart boy. Always were, but not smart enough to stay away. Were you?" I turned to leave, suddenly desperate to get out of this room, to get as far from this mirror as possible. But as I moved, I felt something catch my ankle. Looking down, I saw a small pale hand emerging from beneath the bed, gripping me with unnatural strength. More hands appeared from under the toy chest, from inside the closet, from behind the bookshelf, dozens of small childlike hands reaching for me, grabbing at my clothes, my arms, my legs. I fought against them, kicking and thrashing, but there were too many. Through my panic, I heard the reflection laughing, a high childish sound that echoed strangely in the sealed room. I looked up to see the surface of the mirror rippling like disturbed water, the reflection of the child me stepping forward as if the glass were no barrier at all. "We've waited so long," it said, its voice now a chorus of whispers. "Now we can finally come through." With a tremendous effort, I broke free from the grasping hands and lunged for the door. I slammed it behind me, hearing the impact of small bodies hitting the wood. An instant later, hands scrabbled at the gap beneath the door, pale fingers reaching desperately into the hallway. I ran downstairs, out of the house, not stopping until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for an instant thought I saw a small figure standing at the upstairs window, a child-sized silhouette, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. I drove straight to a hardware store, bought hammers, nails, and boards, and returned to the house, determined to seal that room permanently. But when I reached the second-floor hallway, I found only a blank wall where the blue door had been. No seam, no trace that a door had ever existed there. Just faded floral wallpaper, undisturbed and intact. Had I imagined it all? Had the stress of returning to my childhood home triggered some kind of psychotic episode? But no, the photograph was real. I still had it tucked into my wallet for safekeeping. And now I remembered everything: the blue room, the mirror, the other me who wanted to come through. The reason we had fled this house 30 years ago. I sold the property the following week, accepting the first offer that came in, despite it being well below market value. I didn't tell the young couple about the blue room or the mirror. I couldn't have shown it to them even if I'd wanted to. The door was gone, hidden once more behind solid-seeming wall. But sometimes, late at night, I wake from dreams of that room to find my mirrors covered with condensation, as if someone on the other side had been breathing against the glass. And in the foggy surface I sometimes see childish handwriting appear. I'm still waiting. I'll always be waiting. I've moved 3 times since then. I've thrown away or covered every mirror in my home. But it doesn't matter how far I go or what precautions I take. I know the truth now: some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. And somewhere, in a house that looks like mine, but isn't, someone who looks like me but isn't, is still waiting for his chance to come through. Story 6. I never expected to hear my grandmother's voice again after she passed away. It had been exactly 6 months since her funeral, a somber affair with rain pattering against the church windows, as if the heavens themselves were in mourning. My grandmother Eleanor Webb had been the constant in my life when everything else felt uncertain. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was just 7 years old. Her modest 2-story home in rural Vermont became my sanctuary, her wisdom my guide through the turbulent years of adolescence. The night it happened, I was alone in my apartment, grading papers for my literature class. The autumn wind howled outside, rattling the windows of my 3rd-floor apartment. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang, displaying an unknown number on the screen. Normally I would have ignored it. Who calls at such an hour except scammers or wrong numbers? But something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, expecting to hear a robotic voice about my car's extended warranty. There was a crackle of static, then silence. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a voice that made my blood run cold. "Michael, is that you, dear?" My grandmother's voice, unmistakable. The slight New England accent, the warm tone that always made me feel safe. The distinctive way she pronounced my name with emphasis on the first syllable. "Who is this?" I demanded, anger rising at what I assumed was a cruel prank. "This isn't funny. It's Grandma Eleanor, sweetheart. I know this must be confusing for you." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "My grandmother died 6 months ago. Whoever you are, this is sick." The voice sighed, a sound so familiar. It made my chest ache. "Do you remember the blue tin box hidden under the loose floorboard in your childhood bedroom? The one where you kept the arrowheads we found by the creek and the letter from your first crush? I never told anyone about that, Michael. Not even after I found it while vacuuming one day." My breath caught in my throat. The blue tin was my secret, something I'd never shared with anyone. The floorboard had been so well concealed that it seemed impossible for anyone to know about it. Unless... "Grandma?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "How is this possible?" "I don't have much time," she said, her voice suddenly sounding distant, as if she were speaking through layers of interference. "I shouldn't be calling at all, but I needed to warn you." "Warn me? About what?" That's when I first noticed the strange background noise, a constant rushing sound, like wind blowing through a vast empty space, punctuated by what sounded like distant crying or moaning. "Things are different here than what we were taught to believe," she said cryptically. "The boundaries aren't as solid as they should be. Something's happening." And the line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped it. I tried calling back the unknown number, but an automated voice informed me that the number was not in service. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I alternated between convincing myself it was an elaborate hoax and wondering if I'd finally cracked under the pressure of grief. By morning, exhaustion had won out over fear. and I managed to rationalize the experienced stress, lack of sleep, and the anniversary of her death approaching must have combined to create an auditory hallucination. 3 days passed without incident. I was sitting in my living room, reading a novel my grandmother had given me years ago, when my phone rang again. Unknown number. My heart raced as I answered. "Grandma?" "Yes, it's me again." Her voice sounded clearer this time, more present. "I don't know how long I can talk. They don't like us reaching out." "Who doesn't like it? Where are you?" The questions tumbled out of me. "I can't explain everything. It doesn't work that way. But I need you to listen carefully." There was urgency in her voice now. "Go to the house. My house. There's something you need to find before it's too late." "What am I looking for?" "My journals. The ones in the locked chest in the attic." The key is, her voice was suddenly drowned out by a surge of static, and that same eerie background noise. Louder now, the moaning more distinct. "Grandma, I can't hear you." "Where's the key?" "Behind the loose brick in the fireplace." Her voice cut back in. "Michael, be careful. Don't try to The call ended abruptly again. This time, I immediately tried calling back, but got the same automated message. I sat there, clutching my phone, trying to process what was happening. Was I losing my mind, or was my dead grandmother really calling me from wherever she was? The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove the 3 hours to my grandmother's house in Vermont. The property had been sitting empty since her death, as I couldn't bring myself to sell it yet. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The collection of antique teacups in the china cabinet, the handmade quilts draped over every couch and chair, the faint smell of cinnamon and old books that I always associated with her. I went straight to the fireplace in the living room, running my fingers along the bricks until I found one that moved slightly under pressure. Behind it, just as she had said, was a small brass key tied with a faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I took it and headed for the attic stairs. The attic was dusty and filled with shadows even in the middle of the day. The locked chest sat in the corner under a slanted ceiling, exactly where it had always been. As children, my cousins and I had speculated about what treasures it might contain, but Grandma Eleanor had always kept it locked, saying some things were private. The key fit perfectly. Inside the chest were a dozen leather-bound journals, each labeled with a year. I took them downstairs, where the light was better, and began to read. What I discovered sent chills down my spine. My grandmother, the practical, no-nonsense woman who had raised me, had apparently been involved with a group called The Journals. Documented their activities, sentences, rituals, and experiments designed to communicate with the dead. According to her writings, the group believed they had discovered a way to thin the veil between worlds. The entries from 1976 were particularly disturbing. The group had apparently succeeded in establishing contact with what they called the other side, but something had gone wrong. My grandmother's handwriting became increasingly erratic as she described voices coming through electronic devices, cold spots in rooms, and the feeling of being watched. The final entry from that period simply read, "We've opened a door that was meant to stay closed. God forgive us." After that, the journal shifted to mundane topics: gardening, recipes, reflections on raising me. It was as if she had deliberately turned away from whatever she had been involved in. But the final journal, the one from the year before her death, contained a single disturbing entry. "The dreams have returned. I hear them calling through the static. The door is weakening again. Especially as the anniversary approaches, I fear what might come through if it opens completely. I must warn Michael." That night, back in my apartment, I waited by my phone. At exactly midnight, it rang. "Grandma, I found the journals," I said immediately. "What was the Threshold Society? What door are you talking about?" "You always were a bright boy," she said, and I could hear the sad smile in her voice. "We were young and foolish, playing with forces we didn't understand. We thought we were making scientific breakthroughs, communicating with the deceased, but we weren't talking to human spirits, Michael." "Then what were you talking to?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "There are entities that exist in the spaces between. They've been trying to find a way through for centuries. They mimic us, Use our voices, our memories, the threshold society accidentally created a connection. A door. We managed to close it, but it never fully sealed. The background noise was getting louder, that constant wind, and the moaning that now sounded almost like words in a language I couldn't understand. Are you saying you're not really my grandmother? I asked, my mouth dry with fear. No, it's me, Michael. For now it's still me. But I don't know how much longer. The connection works both ways. Each time I call, the door opens a little wider. They're learning to use the connection better. Who are they? Who are they? I can't name them. Names have power. But they've been waiting. The anniversary of the original ritual is coming October 31st. The boundary will be at its weakest then. Halloween. Just 2 weeks away. What can I do? I asked desperately. Find Thomas Blackwood. He was part of the society. He'll know what to do to reinforce the boundary. But be careful. Don't trust any calls from me after tonight. It might not be me anymore. The line went dead again. This time, when I tried to call back, my phone wouldn't even connect. The next day, I began searching for Thomas Blackwood. It wasn't easy. The man was practically a ghost himself. No social media presence, no listed phone number. Finally, through Old Town records, I discovered he was living in a retirement community about an hour away. Blackwood was in his 80s, frail but with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. When I introduced myself as Eleanor Webb's grandson, his small apartment was cluttered with books on occult subjects and strange symbols drawn on pieces of paper pinned to the walls. I've been expecting someone, he said, inviting me in. The boundary is thinning again. Isn't it? I can feel it in my dreams. I told him everything, the phone calls, the journals, my grandmother's warnings. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if I was confirming things he already knew. Your grandmother was our medium, he said when I finished. The strongest natural talent I've ever seen. She could reach across the boundary with ease, which made her both valuable and vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? To them. He gestured vaguely at the air around us. We called them the listeners. They exist in a realm parallel to ours, separated by a boundary that's normally impenetrable. But certain places, certain times, certain people can create tears. Your grandmother was such a person. And these listeners, they want to cross over. Why? Blackwood's expression darkened. Our world is full of sensations they covet. They exist in a place of emptiness, no true physical form, no sensory experiences as we understand them. They hunger for what we take for granted. But what would happen if they crossed over? They would need vessels, he said simply. Bodies. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Possession, of a sort. But the original consciousness wouldn't survive the process. I thought of my grandmother's warning not to trust future calls. So when my grandmother calls me, it might still be her, reaching out from beyond through the connection you share. Or it might be something else, learning to mimic her perfectly. The closer we get to the anniversary, the harder it will be to tell the difference. How do we stop this? Blackwood rose shakily to his feet and retrieved an old leather-bound book from his shelf. The ritual requires specific items and must be performed at the original location where the boundary was first weakened. My grandmother's house, I said. He nodded. On Halloween night we must reinforce the boundary before midnight. After that, it may be too late. That night, my phone rang again at midnight. I hesitated before answering. Michael. My grandmother's voice sounded different, slightly off in a way I couldn't quite identify. Why did you go see Thomas? He can't be trusted. A chill ran down my spine. Grandma said not to trust any more calls. A pause. Of course I said that, dear. I was worried about the connection. But it's stronger now, clearer. Thomas was always jealous of my abilities. He'll try to trick you. The background noise had changed too. Instead of wind and moaning, there was a strange rhythmic pulsing like a heartbeat, but too fast, too alien. What was the name of my first pet? I asked suddenly. Another pause, longer this time. What a silly question when we have so little time. Answer it, I insisted. Your cat. The orange one. Wrong, I'd never had a cat. My first pet was a turtle named Franklin. You're not my grandmother, I said, my voice shaking. The voice changed then, becoming deeper with an unnatural resonance that made my ears hurt. Clever boy. But it doesn't matter. We've learned enough from her memories. The door is almost open, and soon we won't need these primitive communication methods. I hung up, my hands shaking violently. I immediately called Blackwood. It's happening faster than I feared. He said when I told him about the call. They're getting stronger. We need to perform the ritual tonight, not wait for Halloween. But you said it had to be on the anniversary. That would be ideal, but we may not have that luxury anymore. Every time they make contact, the boundary weakens further. Meet me at your grandmother's house in 3 hours. Bring something that belonged to her, something personal. I grabbed my grandmother's old silver locket, the one with a picture of her and my grandfather on their wedding day, and drove through the night to Vermont. The house looked different in the darkness, more foreboding than I remembered. Blackwood was already there when I arrived, his car parked in the driveway. Inside, he had begun setting up for the ritual, candles placed in specific patterns, strange symbols drawn on the floor in what looked like chalk, and various herbs burning in small dishes, filling the air with pungent smoke. The boundary is thinnest in the attic, he explained. That's where your grandmother conducted most of her sessions with the Threshold Society. As we worked, my phone rang repeatedly. Unknown number. I ignored it, but each time it rang longer, more insistently. On the 5th call, Blackwood nodded for me to answer and put it on speaker. We know what you're trying to do, said the voice that was no longer pretending to be my grandmother. It was a chorus now, multiple voices speaking in unsettling harmony. The door is already open enough for us to reach through. As if to demonstrate, the temperature in the room plummeted. The candles flickered wildly, though there was no draft. A picture frame on the wall suddenly cracked, the glass splintering without being touched. You're too late, the voices continued. We've been patient for decades. Tonight we cross over. Keep them talking. Blackwood whispered to me as he worked faster to complete the ritual circle. The more energy they use to communicate, the less they have to break through. Why my grandmother? I asked the phone. Why her house? She invited us in, the voices replied, sounding almost amused. All those years ago she called out to the darkness, and we answered. She tried to close the door, but a part of her always remained connected to us. Through her blood, through you, we found our way back. You're lying, I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. She was trying to warn me about you. Was she, or was she preparing you? The blood connection makes you an ideal vessel. She knew that. A loud crack echoed through the house, like the sound of breaking wood. From upstairs came a heavy thud, then another. They're trying to manifest physically, Blackwood said urgently. We need to complete the ritual now. Give me your grandmother's locket. I handed it to him, and he placed it in the center of the circle he'd created. The phone call ended abruptly, but now we could hear movement in the attic above us, scraping sounds like furniture being dragged across the floor. Blackwood began to recite words in a language I didn't recognize, his voice growing stronger with each phrase. The candles flared brighter, and the symbols on the floor began to emit a faint bluish light. The house shook. From upstairs came a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. The lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving only the candles and the glowing symbols. Whatever happens, don't break the circle, Blackwood warned as he continued the incantation. My phone rang one final time. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. It wasn't unknown number. This time, it was my own number calling me. Before I could process what that meant, the attic door flew open with a bang. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs, slow and deliberate. I couldn't see who or what was coming down in the dim light, but I could make out a silhouette that seemed wrong. Somehow too tall, too thin, moving with an unnatural jerking motion. Blackwood's voice rose to a shout as he completed the ritual, throwing some kind of powder onto the locket that burst into bright white flames. The approaching figure let out an inhuman shriek and lunged toward the circle. There was a blinding flash of light, a sensation of extreme pressure, as if the air itself was being compressed, and then silence. When my vision cleared, Blackwood was on the floor, looking exhausted but triumphant. The candles had been extinguished, but the locket remained intact in the center of the circle, now marked with strange symbols that seemed to have been burned into the metal. "Is it over?" I asked, helping the old man to his feet. "For now," he said grimly. "We've reinforced the boundary, but it's not a permanent solution. The listeners are patient. They'll wait, gather strength, try again. What do we do?" "Your grandmother's connection was the weakest point in the boundary. With her gone and the ritual complete, it should hold for some time, but you'll need to be vigilant. The blood connection makes you sensitive to the boundary. You'll know if they start trying again." I helped Blackwood to his car and thanked him for his help. As he was about to leave, he turned to me with a serious expression. "One more thing, Michael. If you ever receive a call and hear your own voice on the other end, don't answer. That would mean they've found another way through a way we might not be able to stop." That was 3 months ago. I haven't received any more calls from unknown numbers. I've moved into my grandmother's house permanently, partly to maintain the boundary, and partly because it feels right somehow, continuing her legacy of protection. I've been transcribing her journals, learning more about the Threshold Society and the mistakes they made. Knowledge is power, and if the listeners try again, I want to be prepared. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear my phone ringing, but when I check, there are no missed calls, no notifications, just the wind in the trees outside and the normal creaks and groans of an old house settling. But last night, something changed. As I was falling asleep, my phone lit up with a text message. No number, no sender information, just 5 words that made my blood run cold. "The door is still open. I don't know what's coming next, but I keep my grandmother's locket close, and I remember what Blackwood told me about being vigilant. The boundary may be stronger now, but it isn't impenetrable. And somewhere in the spaces between worlds, the listeners are waiting, watching, planning their next attempt to break through. And sometimes when the house is completely silent, I swear I can hear them breathing,